Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Adil Sultan, Acting Dean, Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies at the Air University. Good morning to those who in London and good afternoon to all those from Pakistan or in South Asia. We are really grateful to all the panelists, especially to Vice Chancellor, that he has taken time out for this discussion that we consider is very important. Not only for the students, but as for the general public also. And we are also grateful to all the worthy panelists that they have taken time out to join us for today's discussion and to do some forensics of this national security policy that has been recently launched by the government of Pakistan. And it has been an outcome of a work of over 7 years. So several governments have contributed in the formulation of this policy. The important factor in this policy, the document, the brief document or the summary that has been released, because the document, the complete document, some parts are confidential, obviously, because that is a common practice. But whatever the summary is available and what the government, the statements that are coming from the government side, that it is the first time that national security policy has been released. And the main focus in this policy is human security. So that is human-centric approach. That's very interesting. And it also talks about a shift to geoeconomics. That also brings out an interesting dimension for a country like Pakistan, where the geostrategic environment has not changed, the geopolitical realities that remain the same. And without bringing reforms in internal mechanism of the governance, how geoeconomics objectives can be achieved. I think we have a combination of very capable analysts and the speakers today who would be discussing on these issues. Before we formally start, I would request the Vice Chancellor, Air Marshal Javed Ahmed, to give his opening remarks on the webinar and on the topic also. Sir, over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Adil, thank you very much for inviting me. And I would like to thank the panelists, especially Dr. Salma Malik, who's a very frequent panelist, to join us in illuminating some salient features. This Adil ne kaha, the forensics of the topic. I also welcome Dr. Salma Shaheen. So mere liye Salma barabar hai, whether they are students or you're all very well respected. And I would also like to welcome Dr. Toghrul Yamin to join us and talk about this very important topic. I appreciate Adil, I sincerely appreciate your effort. I know Adil is bringing up the department on very modern lines. At least he provides a platform for students to interact. And I think each one of us has learned a lot in the last 2 years in the COVID situation. We are not out of it as yet. Even today, we have only 50% of the strength attending university, and the rest of the 50% is online. So I think FASS department is doing very well. I assured Adil we will provide him all facilities. He has exactly designed his office like he was in King's College London. So I would, you may like to visit him sometimes. It's a new upcoming department with I think a lot of potential as far as the students are concerned. If I look at the topic, I think it's a very interesting topic. I know this is the first policy, but if I look back at my years in the NDU and where all we studied, we always had a national security policy. It was tasked, it was debated, and then somewhere it must be lying in files for every course which graduates from NDU and also with many of the think tanks. So I believe if we have a policy, I think it's a very good thing that Pakistan finally has a national security policy. And if it has taken some years for the policy to be formulated, it speaks of the work which must have gone through in formulating these core areas mentioned in the policy. There will always be heartburns, there will always be critics, there will always be both sides to the story. But if I dispassionately analyze on what this policy gives you, I think it gives you quite a lot. And in maximum terms, it gives you a base to start thinking in the right direction. I know it will be revised every year. It will be revised after every 5 years. There will be amendments. I think it provides a very good platform for debate. I believe in positivity, so I'm very positive that this policy will do good to Pakistan, despite the limitations which generally people will point out. What we must understand is that although forensics and critique is good, but then we must always look at solutions also. So I'm sure that now that we have a policy in place, there will be strategies to implement and there will be plans to get things moving, because the core ingredients of what a national security policy should have are available. I know I've read some critiques from the Indian side, and they're very sore about how it is written and what all is missing and why Pakistan compulsorily had to go through this. But I think the base is right there. The basics have been covered. I would just say that Pakistan has very unique challenges. You're all very familiar with many things which we do not generally discuss. Our media is mostly focused on not on challenges, but mostly on political rhetoric, which takes up a lot of your time. I wish had we debated at our forums all these challenges, this policy could have come much earlier. But I look forward to a very interesting discourse. I'm not an expert, so I will not comment in the areas which I'm very sure, as Adil said, the forensics will be done by all our capable panelists. For the students, I think it's a very good opportunity to learn from experts. And I think this is one perspective which you must keep in mind, that all these people sitting in front of you are experts, and it's their inputs which basically somehow, even if they don't know it, must have gone into the implementation of this policy. So I wish the panelists very best. I look forward to a very interesting discourse. My apologies for not being able to join you for very long. I may go offline because of a prior commitment, but best of luck. And Adil, thank you for inviting me.
Sir, thank you very much for being with us and always supporting our initiatives, sir. Always a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, now we formally start our discussions with the panelists. There's a slight change. Dr. Salma Malik has to leave early. So I would request Dr. Salma Malik to start first. Dr. Salma Malik is assistant professor at Department of Strategic Studies, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. And Dr. Sabah, all yours, please.
Thank you very much, Adil, and my apologies to my worthy colleagues for hogging on their time. There was a parallel meeting which I have to attend. I have to excuse myself out from. And I'm extremely grateful that you people considered me to be part of this forensic. When we're looking at the topic that I was to focus more on was the conceptual underpinnings of a national security policy. And from going generic to specific, why does any country need a national security policy? What is a national security policy? What are its imperatives? So the whys and whos and hows of the situation takes you to this point where you look at any country's security policy, especially when you put the tag national to it, from a holistic prism. It is an appraisal of a country's security needs. And when we look at further, when we are deciphering it, when we look at security needs, in today's parlance, security needs are not something which are exclusive to traditional security parameters or external security, unlike the older version that we would think about once upon a time. Now, the aspect of security has undergone radical change, yet by saying radical change, the very fundamental of those traditional security parameters are still as strong and as worthy as possible. When this debate about alternate security was undertaking during the 1960s and 70s in Europe and the Western capitals, and that was a time when the Cold War was at its peak, many of the proponents of looking at security from an alternative perspective would talk about the fact that between year 2020s to 2030s, the global environment is going to undergo a fundamental change. And that fundamental change is primarily going to be the fact that the resources that people are enjoying today, and that was a time of global boom, are going to dwindle and are going to go down. And there's a need that we get into sustainable economy. There's also a need that we need to realize that geopolitics, geostrategy is going to hold true for a couple of decades, but then it's going to be a time for economics. It's going to be a time for geoeconomics. And in that scenario, one has to be extremely cautious about having an economy which is people-centric, which is sustainable, and it is people-friendly. And it is equity-based. It is not equitable, but while it is equity-based, it is also equality-based, and there is justice and growth and rule of law and several other things that are wedded into providing the maximum to people all around you. And today we are actually living that moment. We have already entered the 2020s, and now we are going towards the 2030s, where we already see that one small, tiny bit of a virus has really turned the world around its heels. Whether it was very well military entrenched, the US, or it was Korea, or it was Pakistan, or it was India, every country, Africa, every country, every zone of the world was somehow drastically affected by a small virus. And despite of impoverishment, or despite having a lot of wealth, nothing could save people. So the pundits of the 1960s and 70s, what they talked about having security be viewed upon from a different angle, ended up getting proven true, that we need to have a reappraisal of security. Now, coming to this aspect that when we're looking at national security, not only the traditional aspect has to be looked into, as I just said, alternate security perspective also need to be catered to, and rather it is not something which is happening at parallel tracks. We actually see that there's a mergence of both of these aspects. Many a times your economic insecurity, your health insecurity is impinging on your traditional security, climate change, so many other things are changing the entire mindset of the global citizenship as to how things are happening, how these threats are happening. And on another platform, what is happening at the traditional level is also affecting these non-traditional aspects. And I really don't want to get into a lecture on traditional and non-traditional, because we are all pressed for time here. But one point that I need to flag here is, given that the environment on traditional and non-traditional security, 2030, if we take it as a timeline, is also a timeline when Pakistan willfully signed the Sustainable Development Goals, which had a 30-year mandate, and by 2030, the traditional Sustainable Development Goals are going to maturize, and Pakistan and many other countries have to respond to what all they did in terms of adapting these goals into their national setup and structure. So having said that, this particular doctrine or this particular document that has come out, I wouldn't actually call it a doctrine, it's a document that has come out. It is a vision statement in a larger context, because it is providing us with a roadmap. It is a very simply worded document, nothing too complicated about it, nothing very complex or having underpinnings to it. But the very fact is that it is providing this information to the citizens of Pakistan, the primary target area, primary target audience, and to the larger audience global, including the adversarial countries, as to what Pakistan really wants in this changing global dynamics, where there's this shift drastic, and Pakistan remains as a buffer and a pivot state through which this particular shift is actually happening. We are on the fault line of that particular shift, from geostrategic to geoeconomic. And that particular fault line, if we really want to trace it and give it a physical connotation, I won't shy away from saying that it is technically the CPEC. So if there is a seismic fault line that one needs to identify when it comes to geostrategic to geoeconomic shifting, that is the CPEC and the larger BRI that is around us, which is actually creating a lot of ripples in the world as to how the global politics are changing. So I would actually say that it's a good time frame when this policy has come out, because at least it provides you with a vision as to what Pakistan should do, what Pakistan is actually thinking of doing. And plus the fact that here we have a extremely well-informed audience and participants who are sitting and talking about various things. Yet the very fact is that the document that we are discussing here is a 48-page executive summary of a much larger document, which has things spelled out in greater detail. What are those greater details, depending on how and when they're shared, is going to make a lot of changes and make a lot of differences. But few things which are generic to this particular aspect that have been talked about several times. One, of course, is it is a citizen-centric document. It is a policy which is actually catering largely to the people, because it is focused more on the holistic aspect of security, where the non-traditional security aspects are thoroughly looked upon. So it remains citizen-centric. It is also a youth-centric policy. And I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it, because Pakistan is one of those countries which has a huge youth bulge. And because the security policy must have in its constituents as to what are your threat assessments, what are your future challenges, what are your future imperatives. So Pakistan really has to cater to a growing population as to what it is going to face in the future. And that growing population, the bulk of the population, are the human resource in the shape of young people that you have in your university and so many other universities, and young people like Salma, who have, mashallah, now grown beyond that definition of a student, but they remain young, and now they're contributing back to the thought pool that is there. So there's a need to have more such informed, more such qualified youth who contribute to the larger body politics of the state of Pakistan. It is also a policy which was inclusive. When we said inclusive, I was part of a working group which was looking at gender, peace, and security, where we initially had a debate: are we going to look at women, peace, and security, or gender, peace, and security? Because when we talk about gender, we are going beyond the binary debate of male, female. We're also looking at the other perspectives on gender. And we willfully decided to remain as gender, peace, and security, because by and by, we're also realizing that the Pakistani state and society, as well as lawmakers, are providing more space. There's more conversation around gender at large, which for a country which is pretty traditionally wired and at times very conservative in its thinking, is a miraculous thing, because we are not shying away from a very important aspect, which is the gender debate, and not only the women debate. Yet, because I was part of the working group, I would have been happier if we had more than 2 paragraphs mentioned in this executive summary, but I'm sure the detailed document carries much more. It is also consultative. It has had a lot of people who are who have been consulted in the process as part of institutional makeup, as part of standalone consultants and professionals, and so many other things. But the fact is that it is nothing which is very extraordinary. By saying extraordinary, what I tend to mean here is that it's not kind of a reinventing of the wheel. There has been a criticism on this policy that Pakistan had the NISP, the National Internal Security Policies, 2 of them unfolded previously, and by now a national security policy. But perhaps at that time, the more pressing requirement was for an internal security policy than a national security policy. And it could be an incremental exercise. But this is something which is independent of the previous internal security policies that have unfolded. This is a project which took 7 years in making, and a lot of consultation and inclusive dialogue that went into the making of this thing. It talks about the traditional security aspects that Pakistan, or the threats that Pakistan has faced, but it also talks about the upcoming challenges and upcoming threats that Pakistan could face and would face in the future. Now, where does this issue, where do we find a problem? The problem would happen when this policy document, when this roadmap, this vision document, however you would like to call it, or you just want to call it as a national security policy, is put into practice. And that is where we find much of a disconnect. There has already been chalked out by the National Security Advisor, as well as the NST at large, that it's going to get into monthly to yearly to a 5-yearly review and revision. It is going to be a document which is a live document, which is a happening document. It is a document in real time. All of those things are perfect. But when I take this document coming from an institution known as the NST, which actually took a lot of time getting the legitimacy and the authority that it wanted to exercise in order to make this policy, when I take this policy to the implementers, the institutions, the various bodies that need to implement this vision document, that is where I might find a disconnect. And that is where the disconnect would actually happen because there's a gap here. And that gap would lead to a lot of clash, that would lead to a lot of inertia. So the major deficit that we may find in the coming days is going to be where the implementation phase starts and how the implementation has to be chalked out. So the task up ahead, and I would, this is going to be one of my last points, the task up ahead for the NST and the team that has charted or drafted the national security policy is where they take this document to each and every stakeholder institution and try to put it into practice. Are they all on a similar page? Are they all matching their footsteps? Are they all working at the same pace? Is going to be a major challenge. And unless and until this trust deficit and this gap, and also this particular question that you are intruding on my jurisdiction and my territory is going to be bridged, and a comfort zone is going to be created, how soon that comfort zone is created, how well the NST and the stakeholders connect with each other and start performing, and how soon they start performing is a very important question, and that is going to actually contribute to the success or failure of this policy. Thank you very much, Adil. Thank you, Aiza.
Thank you. Grateful, Dr. Salma Malik. Again, a slight deviation as Dr. Salma Malik has to leave. She requested if somebody has a pressing question, she can answer one or two. You rightly mentioned about the internal friction or the gaps during the implementation, but there is also a counter argument. The international liberal order is heading towards a demise. So in that kind of international environment, how do you play your geoeconomics, especially once your domestic economy is not stable and autonomous also? It is being dictated or under pressure by various extent. But that's a separate debate. I'll give an opportunity to a questioner, Ms. Adila. She asked a question. So I think that was what you said. But if you want to expand on what you said, her question is, how can policymakers and policy implementers bridge the gap between the aspiration of the policy? Sorry, that's from Faraz Heather. Yeah. Adila's question was...
Myra Pervez has asked a question from everyone, even it is a result of great consultation. I'll just read this question. I'll try and address them together if I can.
Ma'am, just hold on, please. Ms. Adila was the first one to ask question. You can answer Adila's question and let others answer subsequently Myra's question. So Adila's question was about directly addressed to you. What norms are in need and how will they work out for Pakistan to implement such visionary planning in near future? Partially you answered, but if you want to expand on this.
Well, Adila, thank you for your question. One thing that needs to be clarified from another follow-up question is that the consultants were Pakistani consultants, not foreign consultants. We are good enough to be consulted. So it's a national security policy. So people from Pakistan, by and large, were consulted. In case there were some consultants to build the architecture, that is another aspect, but we are not privy to that. Adila, as to your question, what norms can be there? I would technically say that where the formulation of this policy happened as part of a consultative effort, and there was an attempt by the NST to make it as inclusive as possible. Of course, not everyone can be brought on board. Not everyone is available when such things are happening. But there was a genuine and sincere attempt by the NST to bring as many interested stakeholders and important stakeholders who are vested in this particular exercise that make the part and parcel. What we have in front of us primarily many a times is a security document. There is an economic aspect to it as well, and there are several other things. The toolkits need to be prepared now if they haven't started already working on them. And I think the toolkit needs to be started prepared as of yesterday. As to now, once this policy is there, and already it is a month-old policy, which means that the first monthly review already needs to be undertaken if it has not been undertaken by the NSD. So what does this policy provide to the state of Pakistan in the next 11 months? That is something the stakeholders already need to start working with the NSD upon. What each and every institution has as a vision, as a national action plan or institutional action plan to implement the pros and cons needs to be there. Now, if we take geoeconomics as the buzzword, as the main theme to the security policy, then how in the next 5 years Pakistan is going to create this entire effort to shift from a geostrategic mindset to a purely geoeconomic mindset, but keeping the old traditional problems and threats in mind, is going to be a very, very tough challenge. Plus the fact that Pakistan has very pressing internal security threats, economic, governance, rule of law, politics, socio-political, and so many other things. How all of these things are going to get wedded together. And lastly, one lifeline that Pakistan is really deeply invested in, the CPEC, how we are going to make the most of it. Keeping these 2-3 angles in mind, how does each and every institution and stakeholder chart an action plan is going to be the success of this particular document, plus the fact that Pakistan is also a signatory. In fact, Pakistan was one of the first to sign on the SDGs. How do we qualify for those SDGs? Why I stress so much upon the SDGs is because all of these SDGs are somewhere found in bold print as footnotes, as part of the text of the security policy. And if we don't comply to any of those SDGs, except for climate change, where we are on the orange line, which is just a little bit above the red line, we are technically on the red line, which is the most dangerous level. We need to start performing. We have already wasted 22 years. We are only left with 8 years, which is nothing. And if we don't adapt these SDGs, we are going to be actually out of several international protocols, which are going to severely hamper our vision for a geoeconomic shift and a geoeconomic progress. Because I'll just cite an example. Just recently, we had this interaction with the Pakistan Navy, where the shipbreaking industry at Gadani might actually be facing a death sentence in a year or two because of 2 major protocols, the Basel Protocol and the Hong Kong or Singapore Protocol. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up on these terminologies. These are two protocols about the SOPs adopted for such ship breaking industries. And we haven't done anything on that. and both of them get enforced in the next couple of years, which means that Pakistan will not be able to earn anything out of shipbreaking industry, which is a very old, solid industry, backbone of Pakistan's steel infrastructure for the longest. So unless these compliances and these realizations and action plans are put underfoot, nothing is going to work for us. So we have very limited time, and already the 5th year is started. So I think we really need to work on the double to implement it. I hope I answer your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salma Malik. That was an interesting correlation of SDGs and national security policy, but it's also interesting to see that if we see the documents of some other countries who have publicly declared the national security policy, these external drivers do not guide their national security priorities, but their own national security interests. But this is an ongoing debate, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to continue with our conversation on this national security policy and its implications for Pakistan. Thank you for being with us, for taking time out. I do understand you have a pressing commitment. So now we can move on to the rest of the speakers. Before I request Dr. Toghrul Yameen, I would like to remind all the guest participants that please type your questions in the Q&A window, and I'll give you priority as first come first basis. So now we move to Dr. Toghrul Yameen, who is Associate Dean at Center for International Peace and Stability at National University of Science and Technology. Dr. Toghrul Yameen, floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adil Sultan. Thank you very much, ADIL University. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor Sahab, if he's still around. I can see his icon, but he's not. Maybe he's committed to some pressing requirements. And thank you very much, Aida Azam, for inviting me. Today's panel is a very formidable one. We have got two formidable ladies, Dr. Salma Malik, who's probably left, and Salma Shaheen Saiba. I recall a photograph of the Qaid with the Mountbatten, between Lord and Lady Mountbatten, and he said, "I'm the thorn between two roses." So one rose is walked away, so I'm left with only one rose. I'm the thorn, probably. So thank you very much once again. And I have prepared a small PowerPoint presentation, and I'll make use of it in delivering my lecture. Just hold on for a second, please. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you please enable my screen sharing? Okay.
Dr. Adil, we can't hear you. Could you unmute your mic, please?
So I've allowed you to share the screen, sir. You can now do it.
Still not.
We can see your screen, sir.
You can see my screen. Just hold on a second. But can you see my presentation also?
Once you'll open it, probably yes.
I've opened it. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So the topic that was given to me was assessing the practicability of adopting a geoeconomic security outlook. I have taken out the salient points from this national security document that was issued to all of us who were fortunate enough to be present on the launching ceremony. It says that this is the first national security policy document of Pakistan. The Vice Chancellor had earlier said that such kind of document has been produced by the National Defense University. Since I'm a student of National Defense University and I attended one of the war courses, I know that national security policy papers are produced. They do not see the light of the day. They are distributed within the government. I recall later in my tenure in GHU, I also used to receive a copy of the national security policy and military policy. So, well, maybe it's the first public national security policy document, but such kind of documents have been produced in the past. Second point, it says that it is a citizen-centric, comprehensive national security framework. Thirdly, it says it recognizes the traditional and non-traditional threats and opportunities together, that they together impinge on overall national security. I think that is also understood in today's world. It's not just traditional security. It's not kinetic wars that you will be facing up with. There are many non-traditional threats, which all of us know. Food security, water security, energy security, cyber security, all these things make up for the non-traditional threats, and all of us are aware of it. It places economic security at the core of national security. That is also something, it's a truth. I mean, we all know that if we collapse economically, we cannot fight. The emphasis, it emphasizes a geo-economic vision to supplement focus on geostrategy. Again, without a good economy, you cannot fight a war. You cannot be a secure nation. It recognizes that sustainable and inclusive economic growth is needed to expand our national resource pie. Okay, understood. This will allow greater availability of resources to bolster both traditional and human security. Then it says, foremost aim of our foreign policy and military capability will remain peace and stability in the region and beyond, based on mutual respect and sovereign, what is I must have missed out the last word. Okay, doesn't matter. I think again, the Qaid-e-Azam in his first policy statement, which makes the basis of our foreign policy, said, we want peace within and peace without, and we want peace with all our neighbors, and he included India in it. So all these things have been expressed before as well. So this is one diagram which was given in it. It showed economic security, and below it was written expanded national resource pie. And below that overarching title, it said greater distribution, redistribution. That is what I could understand was that the resources should be equally distributed to tackle both traditional security and human security, and whatever is left of it or whatever cannot be used or should be fed back into the overall economy of the country. Then there was a abridged version given in this with the policy document, and it on the first page it gave the vision of the Prime Minister on national security. It said national security policy 2022-26 centers on my government's vision, which believes the security of Pakistan rests in the security of its citizens. Again, I think it's a well-known fact. Even the Constitution of Pakistan lays emphasis on the citizens. Then it says, then he said, the citizen-centric approach to national security prioritizes national cohesion and the prosperity of the people while guaranteeing fundamental rights and social justice without discrimination. I think these things are already present in our Constitution. Then this policy document had thematic sections which included national cohesion, securing the economic future, defense and territorial integrity, internal security, foreign policy in a changing world, and human security. Then the national security vision, which as outlined in the new policy, it says that Pakistan is an Islamic welfare state, internationally relevant and aligned with the universal principles of justice, equality, and tolerance. I was just wondering, we are an Islamic state. We call ourselves the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Does any national security policy of any country gives ideology? I do not know. Maybe somebody can help me out there. Does the Israeli national policy document, if it's been made public, says that it's a Jewish state, or does the national security policy of People's Republic of China says that it's a communist country? I do not know. Do we have to impress our Islamic values in our national security policy? Open to question. Seeking a peaceful neighborhood based on mutual coexistence, regional connectivity, and shared prosperity. Okay, Dr. Salma Malik talked about BRI and CPEC, and I think this thing, regional connectivity, is in that context. Again, this is something which any right-minded country would want, a peaceful neighborhood with shared goals. Then it says a secure and economically resilient Pakistan empowered by diversity of culture and demographic dividends while ensuring fundamental rights and social justice without discrimination on the basis of caste, creed, or belief, right? Something which the founding father also said, his famous 11th of August speech. He very categorically said that you may belong to any caste, creed, or belief. That has got nothing to do with the business of state. You are free to go to your temples, you're free to go to your mosques, and you cease to be Hindus or Muslims or Christians. In that sense, you are all citizens of Pakistan. Promoting good governance through strengthening of institutional transparency, accountability, and openness as articles of faith, right? This should be there. Now I would on to certain freedoms that as a citizen, because it is a citizen-centric document, it has been emphasized again and again. It is meant for the citizens. So these are the 4 freedoms that should form the basic rights of the citizens. It was given out by the US President FDR in his State of the Union address on January the 6th, 1941. He said that all citizens of the world should have freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. The last 2 things are very, very important. So if we want to have a secure country, our citizens must have all these 4 freedoms. Now, as a citizen, what kind of security do I want? I want security of my life and limb. Instantly, this is enshrined in our constitution. Most constitutions do guarantee safety and security of a citizen's life and limb. But this is not possible for a variety of reasons. And most importantly, unless we have an efficient and a citizen-friendly police force, at least when I'm at my home, I cannot be sure that I'm safe and secure. Then as a citizen, I would like to have at least 2 square meals a day. Then third is I should have safe drinking water, then provision of utilities like gas, electricity, and garbage collection, Medicare facilities. The government has given the Sehat card. I hope it is a huge success. It assures a citizen 1 million rupees worth of healthcare. I hope this happens practically. Access to justice. As a citizen, I would like access to justice. As a citizen, I would like schooling for all children of my children. I am of that age that my children have children. So the Constitution guarantees that there should be free education for children from the age of 5 to 15. But is that practically happening? We have 25 million children out of school. That's a very sad fact. One of the largest number, and as Dr. Salma Malik very correctly pointed out, we have got one of the biggest youth bulge with us. And last but not least, jobs and economic opportunities. So since I am a former military man, I usually like to quantify threats into main efforts, secondary efforts, auxiliary efforts, things like that. So in my view, as a citizen, there are the main threat to me is poverty, hunger, inflation, items of commodities of daily use must not be very, very expensive. My own personal safety and security and the safety and security of my family. I should not be worried about the loss of job or business. And I should not be at the mercy of bureaucracy, a petty bureaucracy, which is corrupt, and where I have to, even for my legitimate needs, I have to bribe somebody in the overall business of state. Then obviously there is internal threat and there is external threat. I have kept external threat at the very bottom. We are seeing in the last few days an uptick in terrorism in Balochistan. Our soldiers have been killed in Kech, Panjgor and Noshki, and the DGISPR has said that their handlers were sitting in India and Afghanistan. So internal threat, which is being compounded by external enemies. So these are all threats which worry me as a citizen. As a common man, I should be free of all these fears. Just to get the feedback of people, I carried out a quick survey from my students and my colleagues here in the Center for International Peace and Stability. Till 11:30, 22 MS students and one odd staff member had responded to my survey. I was just looking at the survey again, and 27 have responded, but there has been no major change in the responses that I've got. So the first question that I asked my respondents was, do you know that a new national security policy had been announced in January 2022? 77.75 people said, yes, they know about it. But I can tell you, my mother doesn't know about it. My wife doesn't know about it. My children who are not in the country, they don't know about it. The peon outside my office doesn't know about it. Have you read the NSP? The answer was 50-50. 54.55% said yes. 45.45% said yes. Again, they are my students, and perhaps to impress me, they might have said that they have read them. Most people, I can assure you, have not read it. How did you learn about the NSP? So 61% said they learned about it from the social media. So social media usually gives you one-liners or two-liners or memes and stuff like that. The real report comes in the newspaper or journals and other things. So majority of the people had learned about the new NSP through the social media. So I assume they do not know the most of it. Would you have read it if it was in Urdu? Yes, सवाल मैंने जानबूझ के पूछा था इसलिए कि हमारे मुल्क में अंग्रेजी से ज़्यादातर लोग नाबलद हैं. बहुत कम लोग हैं जो अंग्रेजी जानते हैं और उर्दू भी बहुत कम लोग जानते हैं. उर्दू शायद 8 या 10% लोग जानते होंगे कौमी ज़बान के तौर पे. ज़्यादातर लोग अपनी ज़बानें बोलते हैं. मैं ये जानना चाहता था, मगर जाहिर है ये तो मेरे स्टूडेंट्स ने जवाब दिया था, क्या बलूचिस्तान के एक दूर अफ्तादा कस्बे में या गांव में क्या किसी शख्स ने ये पॉलिसी पढ़ी होगी या उसको पता होगा कि इस पॉलिसी के क्या मुज़म्मरात होंगे उसकी ज़िंदगी पे? मेरा नहीं ख्याल. 54% तलबा ने जवाब दिया कि जी हम इसको नहीं पढ़ते अगर उर्दू में होती. उसकी वजह ये कि हमारे बच्चे जो हैं वो अंग्रेजी में पढ़ते. मगर मेरे ख्याल में एक आम आदमी जो है अगर उसके लिए उर्दू में ये पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट शायद जारी किया जाता तो अच्छी बात होती. अंग्रेजी में किया गया. वज़ीर आज़म साहब ने खिताब ज़रूर उर्दू में किया. NSA साहब ने भी उस मौके पर खिताब ज़रूर उर्दू में किया, मगर जो उन्होंने डॉक्यूमेंट इशू किया वो अंग्रेजी में था. अब अंग्रेजी का अगर मैं तर्जुमा करूंगा या आप तर्जुमा करेंगे तो उसका वो मुख्तलिफ मफहूम निकलेंगे. अगर इसको सरकारी तौर पे इसको जारी की जाती कॉपी सरकार क्या चाह रही है, सरकार का क्या मतलब है, तो मेरे ख्याल में उसका अंदाजा शायद लगाना हमारे लिए सबके लिए आसान हो जाता.
Sir, can I just briefly intervene? अगर आप could you expedite also because आगे भी है हमारे उस पे question answer because we have a limitation time के close करने का.
जी 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 बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. मैं इसको बहुत तवील नहीं खींचूंगा. ये आखिरी स्लाइड. मैंने इससे आगे ये पूछा कि will it fundamentally change the concept of security in Pakistan? 57.14 said yes. 42% said no. Do you know that it is citizen centric? 59.09%, almost 60% said no. After the NSP, will security in Pakistan still be looked through the prism of military instead of economy? Almost 70% said yes. यानी कहने का मकसद ये कि मिलिट्री ही प्रीडोमिनेंट होगी लोगों के ख्याल में, लोगों का तासुर ये. Does it provide security to women? 61% said no. Although Salma Malik said that they talked about gender. And here also one of the pages, the last page on the average paper says somewhere that enabling participation of women and transgender persons in all avenues of public life and maximizing their inclusion in public institutions and decision-making forums. और फिर माइनॉरिटीज के बारे में सवाल किया कि उनके हालात बेहतर होंगे, 54% का ख्याल है हाँ होंगे. विल देयर बी अ सिग्निफिकेंट रिडक्शन इन डिफेंस बजट? 72% का ख्याल है नो. तो फिर हम जियो इकोनॉमिक्स पे कैसे जाएंगे? ये लास्ट स्लाइड है मेरे ख्याल में. दिस पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट व्हिच हैज बीन इशूड इज मोर ऑफ अ विश लिस्ट. It lacks a clear roadmap for implementation. Most citizens have not read the new NSP and many don't know what to expect from it. The implementation would need a paradigm shift in the official mindset. A meaningful redistribution of resources can only become visible in the next budget. That's all, Dr. Adil Sultan. Thank you for giving me all the time to give out my points.
Sir, thank you very much. Okay, grateful, sir, for this comprehensive overview of the document that has been released. So I'll move on to Dr. Salma Shaheen. She's a London-based analyst. She recently wrote about Pakistan and this national security policy, and she also works, her area of specialization is nuclear issues, but it was an interesting article that we read recently from Dr. Shaheen. Over to you, Dr. Salma.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Adil. Thank you, Aiza, and thank you, Air University, for inviting me to this webinar. I'll be quick in my presentation because much has been said by Dr. Salma Malik and obviously Dr. Tughlaq Jameen. Initially, I divided my talk into two sections. In section one, I will be talking about the contents of the policy, which I think that have some merit to mention. And section two, I designed for, and I wanted to raise issues regarding the implementation and continuity of the policy. But much has been said about these things, so I will be brief in that section. So let's go for the section one. And with regards to the content of the policy, I know that the policy identifies threats, challenges, and opportunities offered by rapidly changing regional and global politics. And it also puts forward approaches to bolster countries' comprehensive national security. However, I view that there are certain ambiguities which need more elaboration with respect to when it says Pakistan should have a proactive foreign policy, enlarging national resources by welfare and military modernization. So I'll go these three one by one. First, regarding foreign policy, but the policy includes foreign policy baseline. It's like on the similar lines, the way British integrated review of 2021, that includes foreign policy baseline as well. The policy emphasizes upon pursuing a proactive, forward-looking, and confident foreign policy behavior. In the context of the same kind of wording is mentioned in the British review as well. So in context of Britain, one can understand that the stress on foreign policy implies a global Britain with a desire to move forward firmly after the Brexit in a world of technological advancements and burgeoning alliances and partnerships across the globe. In case of Pakistan, when the policy states that the country needs a proactive, forward-looking approach instead of static and reactive outlook, it does demonstrate a social construction of transformed self-perception of Pakistan, a perception that Pakistan and its people are actually geostrategically located in a better place. So they aspire to search for a role to play in the regional and global politics. These aspirations could also be based on the recent role that Pakistan played in, but one can say played in Afghanistan politics or situation or Middle Eastern politics, which actually gives a lot of confidence to the country. But I do believe that the proaction that actually this policy aspires for that to materialize, Pakistan does require a potential for agenda setting and facilitation of regional politics and global politics to achieve that agenda. So there's a positive tone of proaction in the document, but besides that, the document does appear confusing when it says that Pakistan should pursue unapologetically its foreign policy. So I just I'm actually confused, or I need more elaboration for my own understanding of, maybe for the general public, that the term and the context of the word unapologetically needs further elaboration. What does it mean? And even in the context of the proactive foreign policy, Pakistan's policy towards Kashmir is incomprehensible to me. And moreover, the policy guidelines to maintain secure air and sea and to manage instead of resolving border disputes tend to exhibit that demonstrates that there are limitations of proaction at regional level. But we can debate on it. That can be debated. Another point is about the welfare, the concept of the welfare state. The policy aspires to ensure citizen security, national cohesion, and a prosperous nation supported thoroughly by the equitable economic development and enhanced social services provision. Now, this development of welfare state is intrinsically linked with the military preparation and the warfare, because any welfare endeavor or any welfare step or program to ensure safety, security, dignity, and prosperity of citizens would establish domestic stability and social cohesion as an insurance against any social revolution. And that would benefit military infrastructure and manpower, as well as civilians' livelihood. Thus, the welfare system, the policy for in the this welfare system will also facilitate Pakistan to survive through tough periods as well. Now, building on this welfare system, the policy further postulates of integrating defense capabilities into a country's economics and societal capabilities to maximize national power. This is quite, similar to the other nuclear armed states white papers of defense papers, especially the British integrated operating concept. This integration could be advantageous or positive in a sense in terms of optimization of national resources and promoting social cohesion. But with this integration, the policy seems to be aimed at expanding national resource pie in order to provide a bigger slice for defense. Moreover, this social services provision could bolster deteriorating economy, convince vulnerable Pakistani citizens a better future in rapidly changing national and global environment, regional and global environment, and ensure, again, a bigger slice for defense out of national resources pie. Hence, the expansion and distribution of national resource pie will correlate welfare to warfare. Third, this is also talked about as well, the human security aspect. So I'll just go briefly, but from a different perspective. The policy places the human security at its heart, as the core of it. Obviously, that can be achieved through social services provision and a sustainable and inclusive economic growth. However, in order to ensure human security, the policy builds an ambiguous symbiotic relationship between economic growth, traditional and non-traditional security. And the policy also claims to move away from the traditional or the conventional guns and versus debate. Now, this is a little bit confusing for me, because on one hand, this demonstrates a transformation of Pakistani state, where it sees that now economic growth and competition are the actually solution to the traditional and non-traditional security challenges. So we should go for economic growth, which is a good thing. But one can, from a layman point of view, the economic growth could directly encourage and ensure citizens' livelihood. But on the other hand, the overwhelming idea that one can grasp from reading the document is that this sustainable and inclusive economic growth is aimed at expanding the national resources pie, in order, again, to devote a bigger chunks to different aspects of security and defense. So in this way, the policy envisages a positive relationship between defense spending and economic growth. However, again, I do understand that it is an executive summary, 48-page, an executive summary of a larger document, 110 pages, I guess, the larger document, the actual document. But obviously, I have to raise some questions that it does not talk about how this national resource pie will be sliced, and how will these slices will be distributed among different elements of national power. What will be the ratio of the defense and welfare spending? And an increase in the welfare of the people also implies an increase in the demand for defense, which in turn again requires more sources for defense. So however, the welfare and defense spending ratio will determine whether or not Pakistan's national security policy has successfully avoided conventional guns and better guns versus better trade-off. Another point relevant to this trade-off requires further elaboration is an increase in the economic activity is deemed as raising the citizens' living standards, improving their well-being. But the document does not explicate or explain to achieve higher economic growth without sustainable depletion of natural resources and degradation of environment. So I would say that there are I guess 2 or 3 paragraphs on climate change and talking about the environment, but this needs to be more elaborated. And I guess Dr. Salma Malik also talked about it in her presentation as well. Another point asked is about the military modernization. The document talks about the military modernization. There's a resolve to increase public investment in R&D of emerging technologies, which actually implies militarization of society to an extent. On one hand, it does display a clear consensual understanding, like all other nuclear armed states as well, that there are challenges for the future societies and economics as a result of the emerging technology. So we need to invest on it. We need to get engaged with it. However, there are states, such as, for example, Japan. I was reading a Japanese defense white paper, latest defense white paper. So it was mentioned that Japanese are struggling to gear a convincing national effort to invest into R&D of the emerging technologies for defense and other purposes. So if I draw a comparison, then it's a good understanding that Pakistan is developing, that we need to move forward. We need to cope with the emerging technologies. On the other hand, the large-scale investments in the defense R&D, especially in emerging technologies, could spawn a variety of problem-solving technologies, techniques, and institutions that would not remain exclusive accessories of the defense establishment. They have and will have applications for civilian sectors, both in public and private. So in relation to the military aspect, the policy guides to deter war through all elements of the national power. Now, this implies for me a broad scope of deterrence for Pakistan. However, this is a little bit unsettled proposition, because once you broaden that scope of deterrence, but at the same time, policy also advocates that we will promote the military modernization, we will promote that broad scope of deterrence without engaging in an arms race. In simple terms, additional national resources for defense suggest increasing defense spending that in turn could embroil Pakistan into competitive military acquisitions and arms race. However, the financial burden of the military modernization on exchequer can be met through increase in the national resources pie, which we have, I mentioned earlier as well. In addition, the cost of incorporating advanced technologies into the military could actually offset the reduction in could be offset by the reduction in the military manpower or military infrastructure, because that can be might be utilized or adjusted with the military advanced technologies. So in this way, Pakistan could thrive on modernization and optimization of force structure, which the policy talks about. However, the caution here is that the modernization and optimization of force structure should work hand in hand. For instance, why I'm saying that? Military manpower and infrastructure bring society and economy closer to defense. Therefore, if optimization of force structure implies reduction in military manpower, then it could challenge the social cohesion. But to overcome that, one can say that the incorporation of technological advancements into defense could bring society and economy closer to defense through technological R&D. So the point I want to make here is that the modernization and optimization of force structure should go hand in hand to keep the key objective of the policy, that of the social cohesion. Overall, this says national security policy implies for me a warfare integrated welfare society state through economic growth, social services provision, and military modernization. The concept of welfare state is built on the understanding that in order to prepare for rapidly changing global and regional environments, a security landscape that is characterized by rise in new partnerships, for example, the consequences of the global pandemic, technological transformations, the policy, the formulation of this document actually shows that we need to go beyond the current security discourses, which actually Dr. Salma Malik mentions as well, which is a positive thing. And it also talks about integration, and it requires integration of civilian and military spheres together. However, an expanded welfare would require a strong and long drawn out defense budgets. Therefore, the national budget will continue to increase and divert more resources from economic development to embrace the omnipresent character of the Pakistan's comprehensive national security. But one has to believe that if one has to believe that an increase in the armaments does not guarantee national security, then how can a state afford both guns and butters in the long run? This is the paradox that policymakers has to justify before public. And I'm not sure because the 110 pages, the main document is classified, so it could have been explained there, but that's the one thing that needs to be explained before public. That's my points about the content of the policy. Section 2, I've already talked about that, that I wanted to raise few questions about the implementation or the continuity of the policy, which Dr. Salma Malik and Dr. Tughal Jamid raised. But I just wanted to talk, highlight one thing, that it is a good thing that policy, the Pakistan produced this policy, published this policy. It is a good document. It is based on the stakeholders analysis, because all the stakeholders were consulted and integrated. Their views were integrated into it, which is a good thing. But then the challenge is that you have to keep the coordination and communication among these stakeholders. How will you do that? That's a challenge. Whether it is detailed in the bigger document, we don't know it. That's the one thing. The conduct of the policy guidelines, the review process, that needs to be explained before the public. What will happen after the 5 years and everything. But one thing I just pointed out from the my other speakers, and I just want to highlight that the timing of the policy. For me, this the launch of this policy at this place in 2022, where this government has just 1 year or 1.5 more year to go, that does not make much sense. It should have been come out in 2018 or 2019, because then they will be uphold this government to support this policy. That actually the same kind of practice happens in the other countries. When the new administration comes in, they work on their policy reviews, national, for example, nuclear posture review, defense with white people, because they have their 4 or 5 years to work on it. So the timing 22 to 2026, the new government will come up in 2022 to 2023. So how will that react? That will be a challenge. So I think the policymaker or the ones who have made this document should keep this thing in mind, that the timing is not so appropriate for it. And another thing that I picked up from Dr. Salma Malik's presentation, that the policy will be, and obviously it is written in the policy, monthly review. Now, monthly review, I mean, that's fine that you keep on reviewing your things, but that should not end up in the review fatigue. A lot of resources have already went over the past 7 years into building up this document. So what kind of a review will you be conducting, monthly, yearly, 5 yearly? All these details should be made before the public to make sure that whatever the resources you are putting in should be optimally used. So that's the point that these are the points that I wanted to make. So any questions, any feedback are more welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salma Shaheen, for providing your views. Of course, this is a framework document, which is also a model for the next governments to take on from there, and according to their own priorities, they will modify. And it's like National Security Advisor also said, it will be an ongoing process. But thank you for your comments. Now we have 2 additional guest speakers also who have worked and written on national security issues. I requested them to join, and they are here, Professor Shaheen Akhtar, who is at National Defense University, and Professor Dr. Azhar Ahmed, who teaches at Bahria University. So, ma'am, what I can do is request you to briefly, as concise as possible, 5 to 6 minutes, each of you, if you can share your views on the document and the debate which is ongoing in this webinar. Dr. Shaheen, first you, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adil, for having me for my comments. It's a pleasure to listen to the panelists and see Dr. Salma Shaheen growing like a mature scholar. So it was really pleasure listening to her. Very short and precise comments, I would say. A lot has been said. I have been also part of this consultative process. So it was like very heartening to be like a part of the conversation and see that how they are evolving and you are contributing into that. So that was probably the best part of the like the process that has taken place. But still, I would say it's not really complete. It's not very comprehensive. There's still need for consensus, the larger consensus amongst the major stakeholder, the key stakeholder on the issues which have been flagged in this document. It's a very good, say, framework to really start conversation, to develop your and say articulate your vision. You see, when it comes to the implementation, it has come to the like the challenges that you face. So for me, a larger political consensus, which is like being say acclaimed, but it does not really reflect in the conversation that we see are like now taking place. So that will be probably the greatest challenge. Maybe this government, like having a major, say, institutional consensus, that's really very good. At least you have the vision, shared vision of Pakistan national security, and you have something to show to the world. Well, this is what we subscribe to. Not that you were not really practicing, but the thing is that you didn't have that to cite. Even when you teach, you need some policy document to refer as a text that this is what you are basically subscribing to, and you may have different opinion about it. So to me, political ownership, a larger political ownership and consensus on the contents and the implementation of the policy is very, very important. On the implementation part, I think everybody has raised the point. We have always have experience of having very good policy, but when it's come to really evolving mechanism, plan for action and strategies, we don't really say demonstrate our that commitment or we don't follow it up. So I think the matching, rather than getting into the monthly review, they should really get to the next step. How they really try to translate it into different like action plans and the mechanism and with the consensus, because now you are dealing with the right stakeholders who are will be part of the implementation, who will be designing the implementation, who will be like implementing the strategy. So the real challenge will come when you are dealing with the those key stakeholders. So to me, it's a work in progress. Okay, so let's move on. It took like a few years, and it needs to really take and move fast. You see, before people forget, you are starting with big claims. Okay, you are moving from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Okay, but if you look at the context, your context continue to be geopolitics. You see, internationally, what you see is a growing, say, Sino-US competition in the region you are placed in. You see that development taking place, which are like putting a lot of pressure on your vision of geoeconomics. So, what are exactly the challenges that you may face in terms of making transition to your, vision of the geopolitics to the geoeconomics? So how you draw the balance? We have tried to really draw a very fine balance, but this balance is like need a lot of say balancing act. You see, whether your environment allows you that or not, you have to see that. So transition, and in the transition period, whatever you have in mind, like what could be it, so how you will be like taking step, you see, make your move. For instance, you talk about the connectivity. We know that CPEC is like being unfolded, and you know this corridor is not having east-west connectivity. a recent ADB report talks about it, it could be like very, good for the economic growth of Pakistan, prosperity of Pakistan, if it is like operationalized as a corridor. You see, you have with connectivity somewhat with the Karaka and all that. But the thing is whether we will be able to operationalize it. So a lot of the prevailing conditions pose huge challenge and test your ability and resolve to really respond to implement your vision. So you have to see your big neighbor here and the new situation, which is constantly in flux and evolving next door, both I think east and west. So that would be like to me a big challenge. I think these were the two main things, because the rest I don't want to repeat, and especially the mechanism part, because good to have a broader consensus on climate change. I have, in fact, I've seen at least the public document part, which is shared. There's much more that is need to be done on the climate change. The cost of the climate change, okay, the cost of the climatic events is not really being flagged. How you are all your ambition of economic growth, even when you talk about CPEC. So what are the environmental, you see, pressures on that? For instance, the Huzza Basin, which is have a big chunk of the KKH passing through, is badly under stress from the extreme events, okay? The gloves and all that. So what is the cost of that, and are you prepared? So risk reduction, disaster preparedness should be, because I think climate change will be the greatest challenge to the economic growth or gains that a state may have in future will be compromised. So we should be prepared for that. So all those challenges which are political, which may be coming from the non-traditional emerging threats, those have to be factored in. And we know what is happening to our climate policy. Okay, there has been a lot of criticism of that as well. And we know that what is happening to our water policy. Okay, there's a lot of criticism on that as well. So all those policies, and probably the when you talk about the nexus, human security, a nexus approach, you see, you need to really evolve at the state level. So I think much work has been done, but much critical work needs to be done as next step. So that's my, immediate observation on that. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saba. Thank you. Grateful. There's always more to do in any policy that you formulate. And I'm very glad that you mentioned about this climate change and environment security. I think that's one issue that faces the humanity at the global level, at the regional level, and at the state level that we have to consider, and we have to think beyond our traditional notion of national security. So that is one positive point. And the other positive point about is, like Dr. Shaheen also mentioned, that she was also involved. So one good thing that has been done, the consultative process. The academia, they had been involved in the brainstorming sessions, and that's why the ownership is also there at the public level. But on a lighter side, it also is a shrewd move from the National Security Advisor to build that constituency who can defend, even without National Security Division defending this national security policy. So that's great. So finally, I would request Dr. Azhar, who wrote a very interesting article recently, day before yesterday it was published, on national security policy. Sir, we are glad that you are here, but we have very short time in which we have to conduct question and answer session, because 4:30 is the class for our students, and we are very particular about that. So I'll request you to make a comment short in 5 minutes if you can share your views. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Adil. Thank you very much. Excellent initiative. I think it's very appropriate that such an important document has to be comprehensively understood and discussed at all levels, and it's an effort that should be appreciated. To start with, thank you very much. One, I'm not an expert on the subject. Second, I have not come prepared because you were kind enough just to invite me now. So I'll remain very general instead of going into the nitty-gritties of the policies. What I'll try to do is to talk about the direction, which is relevant to the NSP, but in the overall governance also. I am nowadays reading Noam Chomsky, Who Rules the World? And well, you already know it, and he tells us who rules the world: the wealthy elite, the capitalist elites, right? And these elites rule the world on the basis of wealth, and they have their monopoly not only on wealth but also on the media, and they set the narratives. And we usually buy those narratives, and it is repeated so much of time that most of us inadvertently fall into that trap and start following that. And therefore, I'll request that I should be heard with attention, because probably I'll be deviating from the established narrative. Even my colleagues have mentioned about geoeconomics and economy. I have been trying to, for at least, you have been hearing me, some of you, and for at least for the last decade or so, I'm trying to put that into at least my own community, that we need to look at these narratives and be able to synthesize the information. And that is, whenever I start my class, on the very first day, I tell them, whatever you read, whatever you hear, take it with a pinch of salt, because that may be agenda setting. When we were discussing, as Dr. Shaheen said, during the one of the sessions, when the Secretary National Security Division, he was presenting the draft, I questioned this, the economy and moving from geopolitics to economy. If you pardon my language, that's bullshit. I'll come to that. And he impressed me by telling me that, look, sir, we are following the China model, professor. And nowadays China is in. And I laughed and I told them, I am teaching China to university students for the last 12 years, so I exactly know what China model is. To start with, as the NSP says, and the National Security Advisor, you were there that day, mentioned also that the world is moving from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Now, I think that is hardly a comparison, and we accept that also. Dr. Salma also mentioned there's nothing like, sorry to say, for the student, there's nothing like geoeconomics without geopolitics. These are not competing terms that we move from one to the other. Politics is only governance, and geoeconomics is, or economics, is just one element or factor of that governance. I tried to check Google just today. I think probably the Oxford Dictionary has not found a definition of geoeconomics. And the Chatham House, it says that we still do not have a universally accepted definition of geoeconomics, but mostly it is accepted as the use of economic tools to advance geopolitical objectives. So now, if you have to use geoeconomics to advance geopolitical objectives, how can you replace geopolitics with geoeconomics? It is not replaceable, because it has to ultimately achieve geopolitics. And if you are distracted from geopolitics, that means you can't achieve those objectives through geoeconomics. So this is a deviation that the capitalist elite has put in our minds, because they do not want us to actually understand what is going on around us, what is going on in the world, what are the larger, and we fall into that trap and we start discussing economics day in and out. You see all the talk shows, television. Well, the government is also talking of economics. The opposition is also talking of economics. दोनों की justification जो है वो economics पे. But the core issue, I think, is even this national security policy says economic security is at the core of national security. I think this is to start with a misplaced direction, wrong emphasis on economy because it distracts us from the core issue. As I mentioned in terms of geoeconomics and geopolitics, in my opinion, economics is a symptom. You have a headache, you want to treat it with painkillers, fine with me. But the actual problem is that tumor that is in your head till the time you do that surgery. If you keep saying that the headache is the core issue, it will not solve the problem. So unless and until you put your house in order, till the time you have good governance, which comes from good leadership and domestic political stability, you cannot achieve sustained economic progress. वो temporarily तो ठीक है, पेन किलर की तरह आपको अफाका हो जाएगा, लेकिन आप देख लीजिए कि हमारे not this government, not this NSP, आप throughout देख लीजिए कि पाकिस्तान में क्या हो रहा है, and why do you have to go to 22-23 times to IMF? क्योंकि हमें लगा दिया गया है इकोनॉमिक्स की तरफ, जो हमारा कोर इशू है, पॉलिटिक्स, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी, गुड गवर्नेंस, उसकी तरफ हम नहीं आते. और वो कहाँ से आ रही है? वो आई थॉट कि वो इकोनॉमिक ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी का एलिमेंट है जो आपकी एजुकेशन और ट्रेनिंग का है. अगर आप इसको एनएसपी में पढ़ें, प्राइम मिनिस्टर के मैसेज को, बड़ा अच्छा सिटीजन सेंट्रिक, हर चीज आपका वो मेरिट बेस्ड जस्टिस, ऑल दैट इज अ फंक्शन ऑफ ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी. तो आपके प्राइम मिनिस्टर का मैसेज तो ओपनिंग सारी बात कर रहा है ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी की, लेकिन आगे आपकी सारी जो डायरेक्शन है नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी की, वो इकोनॉमिक सिक्योरिटी की है, और ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी आखिरी चैप्टर के तौर पे आता है. तो वो आप देखिए कि आपकी प्रायोरिटी कहाँ फॉल करती है. और फिर एजुकेशन, जो कि आपकी ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी को, हम जिस एरिया से बिलोंग करते हैं, वन थिंग्स के कुछ आपकी एजुकेशन का जिक्र होगा, आप टेबल ऑफ कंटेंट में जाएं, आपको एजुकेशन नजर ही नहीं आएगी. देन यू स्टार्ट सर्चिंग, आप कहते हैं शायद ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी में आपको मिल जाए, आपको ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी में नहीं मिलेगी. फिर जब आप ढूंढते हैं तो आपको एक पैराग्राफ एजुकेशन, इनोवेशन एंड टेक्नोलॉजी, वो मिलेगा जाके अगेन इकोनॉमिक सिक्योरिटी के अंडर. तो वो जो हमारी मिसप्लेस्ड प्रायोरिटीज हैं, आई थिंक उनको ठीक करने की जरूरत है हमें. बाकी चीजें ठीक हो जाएंगी. निटी-ग्रिटीज पॉइंट आउट की हैं तमाम स्पीकर्स ने, बड़ी अच्छी बातें की हैं, दे ऑल नीड टू बी असेस्ड. लेकिन पहले हमें ये देखने की जरूरत है कि जो पॉलिटिकल पोलराइजेशन हो रही है हमारे मुल्क के अंदर, जो लीडरशिप का क्राइसिस चल रहा है, क्या हम उसे एड्रेस कर रहे हैं? उसको तो हम मजीद पोलराइज करने की तरफ जा रहे हैं. हम आपस में बैठने को तैयार नहीं है, और फिर हम ये बात करते हैं कि हम इकोनॉमिक सिक्योरिटी के जरिए मुल्क को तरक्की दे देंगे. इफ आई एम इनकॉम्पिटेंट, मुझे आप जितना मर्जी पैसा दे दीजिए, मैं उसको बेहतर यूटिलाइज नहीं कर सकूंगा. बट इफ आई एम कॉम्पिटेंट, मैं पैसा खुद जनरेट कर लूंगा. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि हमें उस तरफ आने की जरूरत है, गुड गवर्नेंस की तरफ, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी की तरफ. बाकी ऑनेस्टली आई एम सरप्राइज्ड, इट विल बी रिव्यूड एवरी मंथ. ऐसे लगता है जैसे किसी को पता नहीं है कि नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी क्या होती है. डॉक्टर तुगरल ने भी बात की, नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी विजन्स कैन नॉट बी रिवाइज्ड एवरी मंथ. और वो क्लियर है उसके टाइटल से भी कि आप उसको कह रहे हैं कि नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी आपकी 2026 है. अब 2026 में जो आपकी पॉलिसी एक्सपायर हो रही है, उसके ऊपर कोई सब्सिक्वेंट पॉलिसीज कैसे बनाएगा? अगला डिपार्टमेंट काम करना शुरू करेगा तो उसको 4 साल लग जाएंगे. तो वो मेरा ख्याल है कि आपकी ये शॉर्ट टर्म ऑब्जेक्टिव टाइमिंग्स की भी बात की सलमा ने, कि वो इस टाइम पे क्यों आया, मेरा ख्याल है हमें देखने की जरूरत है. एक जनरल प्रैक्टिस जो हमारे मुल्क में है वो ये है कि जितनी भी आपकी नेशनल पॉलिसीज हैं, दे आर रिवाइज्ड आफ्टर 10 years. आपकी रिवीजन आती है उनकी, उस दौरान में आप उस पर काम करते रहते हैं, वो सब. तो उसको देखने की जरूरत है. पब्लिक डिबेट, अब मैं भी क्या शामिल हो गया, डॉक्टर शाहीन भी शामिल होगी. पब्लिक डिबेट नहीं हुई। मुझे आप कोई यूनिवर्सिटी बताइए, कोई थिंक टैंक बताइए जिसके अंदर जो है इसके ऊपर पब्लिक डिबेट हुई हो। एटलीस्ट आई एम नॉट इन नॉलेज ऑफ दैट। आइसोलेटेड लोगों को अगर पकड़ के डिस्कशन हुई है, ये बहुत अच्छी चीज है एक्सपर्ट्स को, लेकिन मेरा ख्याल है कि ऐसे डॉक्यूमेंट शुड हैव गॉन इनटू पब्लिक डोमेन। तो वन कैन स्पीक ऑन दिस फॉर एन एंटायर डे, लेकिन चूंकि आपके पास टाइम थोड़ा एंड यू आर काइंड इनफ टू पुट मी इन, I'll stay here unless के कोई क्वेश्चन आंसर में बात आए तो मेन चीज हमें ये देखना है कि वो हमने अपनी प्रायोरिटीज सेट करनी है कि हमें गुड गवर्नेंस कैसे हासिल होती है, ना ये कि हमने पैसा पैदा करना है और वो पैसा हम ऑलरेडी पैदा कर रहे हैं, वो जा गलत पॉकेट्स के अंदर रहा है। हमने उसकी मैनेजमेंट करनी है जो पॉलिटिक्स है, जो कि इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Sir, thank you very much. I think very relevant points made over here, because in the end, whatever policy you develop, if you don't have good governance, you will head nowhere. So this shift to national, to geoeconomics or whatever we say, in the end, it all boils down to good governance and strengthening your own institutions. Another point that I think, sir, that you made, the priorities by the foreign agencies or entities. Is this policy reflective of the priorities of the external agency or Pakistan's public? Because this is important. A person developing national security policy for a certain European country, they will have a different outlook because their focus is geoeconomics, because they do not have that kind of threats, or they are not situated in that geostrategic environment. For a country like Pakistan, just to replicate those kind of notions and then predict that probably it will revolutionize this environment, that's, I think, where there are dealings. But I'm grateful that you brought out these contesting issues, and these are important and these need to be debated. But I slightly disagree on one point that you, national security policy, I think world over, all the political governments, once they come into power, they have their own national priorities and they develop their own national security policies. So for a country like Pakistan, asking after 10 years, I think that will be too much. But I'll not speak more. I'll shut up over here because there are plenty of questions by the students. But I would just like to highlight one interesting comment by my colleague, Ms. Aisha Malik, who teaches here at our department. She says, Mir Shaiba said that although US follows a liberal order, their security approach is dominantly realist. And according to him, it is hypocritical. And that's one lesson that we should also take from it. What the great powers, especially the Western powers, they preach, and actually what they do. Now I'll move on to questions by our very dynamic students. Some of them are asking too many questions, so I'll just take as many as possible. First is by Faraz Haider. He's a student at our department at the Air University. He has asked, how can policy makers and policy implementers bridge the gap between the aspiration of the policy by the National Security Division and its implementation by the institutions and stakeholders? So I'll leave this question for anybody who wants to answer briefly, because we have a number of other questions also, sir. Maybe Dr. Togrel, sir, if you want to take on. Probably he's taking a break. So
no, I'm not taking a break. आपने मुझे वो कर दिया था मेरा ख्याल में। फरमाइए क्या पूछना चाह रहे थे आप, किस सवाल पे बात करना चाह रहे थे?
Sir, the question was, how can policy makers and policy implementers bridge the gap between the aspiration of the policy by the National Security Division and its implementation by the institutions and stakeholders? If you want to start off.
जी, सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज यही है। मैंने आपको यही कहा ना कि जी आपने पॉलिसी तो बना दी, वो भी एक जो हमें डॉक्यूमेंट मिला है वो तो एक विश लिस्ट है, वो हमें पता नहीं, वो कहते हैं कि जी ये बन जाएगा, कब बनेगा, होल ऑफ गवर्नमेंट अप्रोच की बात की गई है, मगर सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज उसकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है। क्या आप दिफाई बजट में कमी करेंगे? کیا آپ وہ جو پیسہ بچائیں گے, وہ جو چارٹ میں نے اس لیے دوبارہ دکھایا تھا کیونکہ وہ کہہ رہے ہیں کہ یہ ٹریڈیشنل اور ہیومن سیکیورٹی میں ہم اس کو باقاعدہ ڈسٹریبیوٹ کریں گے ریسورسز کو, اور دوبارہ اس کو ہم قومی خزانے میں بھیجیں گے, پیسے کو ٹھیک سے ڈسٹریبیوٹ کریں گے. تو نان ٹریڈیشنل سیکیورٹی تھریٹس کو ڈاکٹر سلما شاہین نے بات کی, کلائمیٹ چینج پہ کتنا پیسہ اس کے لیے مختص کیا جائے گا مجھے نہیں پتا. کیا اس پیسے کو کیا اس کو اس میں سے نکالا جائے گا, دفاعی بجٹ میں سے نکالا جائے گا, مجھے نہیں پتا. تو وہ جب یہ تو دس از دا چیلنج کہ امپلیمنٹ کیسے ہوگا, کیا پوری گورنمنٹ آن بورڈ ہے یا نہیں ہے. ڈاکٹر اظہر صاحب نے کہا جی اب تو جو فیڈریشن کی اکائیاں ہیں وہ آپس میں بات چیت کرنے کو تیار نہیں ہے, پولیٹیکل پارٹی سے بات چیت کرنے کو تیار نہیں ہے. آپ نے سب کو بدقسمتی سے سب کو آن بورڈ بھی نہیں لیا گیا. اس پالیسی ڈاکومنٹ کے لیے بھی کچھ لوگوں سے ضرور رائے لی گئی ہوگی, مگر وہ بہت میرے خیال میں آٹے میں نمک کے برابر ہیں. کہا تو جا رہا ہے کہ ہم نے سب سے بات کی ہے. کس سے بات کی ہے بھائی, ہمیں بتا دیں, لسٹ دے دیں. ایکچولی میڈ پبلک ان لوگوں سے ہم نے بات کی ہے, میں تو ان میں شامل نہیں تھا. بہرحال شکریہ بہت بہت.
سر
ہم نے جو کہا وہ مانا نہیں گیا.
سوری,
میں نے کہا ہم شامل تھے, ہم نے جو کہا وہ مانا نہیں گیا.
اگر مشورہ کیا گیا ہے تو بتائیں کن سے مشورہ کیا گیا ہے. اگر ایکیڈیمک سے بھی مشورہ کیا گیا تو ان کی لسٹ دیں. میں تو نہیں شامل ہوں, بہرحال جس سے مشورہ کیا گیا ہو, نہ میرے اسٹوڈنٹس شامل ہیں. تو بہرحال کیا گیا ہوگا ضرور, میں یہ نہیں کہہ رہا نہیں کیا گیا ہوگا, مگر دیکھیں 220 ملین کی آبادی ہے جس میں سے آدھے تو ایڈلٹس ہیں نا, اس میں کتنے لوگوں سے آپ نے بات کی ہے, اور نہ پارلیمنٹ میں آپ نے بات کی ہے. ڈاکومنٹ تو بہت اچھا ہے, اچھی باتیں کہی گئی, مگر اس کو امپلیمنٹ کرنا بہت مشکل ہے جب تک سب لوگ ایک پلیٹ فارم پہ نہ ہوں. شکریہ.
Sir, thank you. I'll now request Ms. Aiza Azam, who is my colleague at the department, and she had raised her hand, and she was also a co-host also in case of an emergency I go off. She was supposed to take over. So she gets a priority for asking a question or making a comment. Ms. Aiza, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Ji.
I just wanted to quickly make a comment. It was refreshing to hear from Dr. Azhar and he gave a slightly different view, and I think it probably ties in with the view that some of us maybe at FAWS also have. I think that in addition to what you mentioned about the difference or the lack of difference between geopolitics and geoeconomics, it seems to me that our policymakers, or at least the team that drafted the national security policy or the summary that they made public, I think they have it backwards, because I'm trying to understand how can you pursue a geoeconomic approach without actually securing geopolitical preponderance first, particularly with the region that we have and with all of our compulsions. But on to my very brief question, I just wanted the thoughts of the panelists. At the launch of the national security policy, we observed they had invited a number of diplomats, lots of representation from the diplomatic community. And when the Urdu section of the launch was actually over, they requested all of those foreign-speaking representatives to stay back so that presumably they could connect it to them or explain it to them in English all over again. Don't you think that this was just, it started to seem to me as if it's more of maybe PR stunt is not the right word. It's more about sort of just aimed at reassuring that particular part of the world that yes, we are trying to change our approach. And also, like Dr. Salma Shaheen mentioned, the timing is very curious because it's coming right towards, almost towards the end of this particular government's administration. So, I mean, it just seems, you might disagree, but I think it seems more of an exercise in optics and less as something which would be practical. So your thoughts would be interesting on this.
Ji, great, thank you. Anybody who wants to go first?
May I?
Ji, please.
May I say something on that?
Yeah.
Actually, I missed that part. I was also invited, and that somehow the diplomats wala tha. I had the invitation, but I had to go for another commitment, so I missed it. I wanted to know actually कि वहाँ पे discussion क्या होती है और किस तरह की होती है, but I couldn't stay there. I think very pertinent चीज एक तो कुछ थोड़ा सा जिस तरह चीज आई है उसमें वो element जरूर है कि वो the government needed that publicity, also a feather in their cap कि जी हमने ये चीज achieve कर ली है which others have not been able to do. लेकिन having said that, I am for this. जैसे कि एयर मार्शल साहब ने भी शुरू में कहा था कि एक अच्छी चीज है to start with. At least now we have a document जिसके ऊपर हम बात कर सकते हैं और फिर उसको subsequently improve भी हो सकते हैं. ये process आज जो आप कर रहे हैं, आदिल ने स्टार्ट किया, इंटेलिजेंशिया के अंदर ये भी होने की जरूरत है. जैसे डॉक्टर सुबुल ने कहा कि पार्लियामेंट के अंदर बाकी स्टेक होल्डर्स के अंदर भी डिस्कशन होगी, तो श्योरली द नेक्स्ट डॉक्यूमेंट विल बी अ बेटर डॉक्यूमेंट. وہ چیزیں پوائنٹ آؤٹ ہوں گی انشاءاللہ, اور وہ بہتر ڈائریکشن میں جائیں گے. اور میں اسی لیے ان چھوٹی چیزوں میں نہیں گیا تھا, میں تو نیشنل ڈائریکشن کو, جیسے کہ آپ نے بھی, تھینک یو فار انڈورسنگ دیٹ, میں تو کہتا ہوں ایک دفعہ وہ ٹھیک ہو جائے, اندر کی چیزیں ٹھیک ہو جائیں گی. امپلیمنٹرز کو پہلے سمجھ تو آئے نا کہ ہے کیا ڈاکیومنٹ, کیونکہ امپلیمنٹرز بھی تو ہم لوگ ہی, اگر ہمارے پاس وہ ڈاکیومنٹ نہیں ہے, پبلک ڈاکیومنٹ پہ کریں گے تو پبلک ڈاکیومنٹ از ویری اسکیچی. اس سے تو آپ کو بہت جنرلائزڈ قسم کی باتیں, وہ کرتوگل نے کہا موسٹ آف دی چیزوں میں کہ یہ تو ہے, اٹ از نون فیکٹ. آپ کیا کہنا چاہ رہے ہیں ایگزیکٹلی؟ اگر آپ فارن افیئرس کے اندر آپ دیکھیے افغانستان کو آپ پڑھیں تو وہ تھوڑا سا الارمنگ ہے, جو مجھے لگتا ہے کہ جس طرح مینشن کیا گیا ہے. کشمیر پہ سلما مینشن کہ وہ آپ کلیئر نہیں نظر آ رہے. آئی ہوپ کہ آپ کی ایکچوئل پالیسی کے اندر ہے. تو وہ چیزیں ہیں, بٹ ہوپ فلی we'll be able to address them as we move on. At least کسی نے پبلش کیا ڈاکیومنٹ, اس کو امپروو کر سکتے ہیں. تو لیٹس بی پازیٹیو, کیپ ٹاکنگ اباؤٹ اٹ. جو ہمیں سمجھ میں آتی ہے چیزیں ٹھیک ہیں, somebody will hear them and correct them.
Grateful, sir. Dr. Salma Shaheen, you had raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. One point I already talked about the timing of the policy. If there is a mid-review kind of thing, if the makers have talked about, so they can actually conduct a mid-cycle review kind of thing when the new government comes in, to take that government on board as well. Because then that government, political government, will have 5 years, so they will take. Because the problem is that a political government has to take the ownership of this policy. It's not the establishment who obviously the bureaucracy and the establishment, they will implement it, but obviously it has to be the political government who, the ownership is important of this policy. And that obviously we know that, you know, because of the polarization and political differences, it's important that there should be a mid-review kind of thing when the next government comes in, whosoever that political government is. And my second point is that about this bridging the gap, or the making this policy to implement this policy guidelines or objectives, is the political process and the institutions are important, because they are the ones who will give the direction, who will own it, and they are the ones who are responsible to the citizens of of Pakistan. Yeah, and once they will take the ownership and they will start working on it, this will work out. I mean, somebody might differ from me, but I don't think so that, you know, establishment or any bureaucracy could take on this comprehensive document forward. So then that's the point I want to make. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question, I'll give another opportunity to our student from our department, Ms. Sara Nazir. Her question is directed towards Dr. Toral Yamin. So she's asking, keeping in mind the threats and challenges that Pakistani citizens perceived and experienced, how can our government be able to achieve security for the citizens? In my opinion, she says it might take a very long period to achieve the security of the citizens, because it needs to bring change in the whole system of Pakistan. Your view, sir?
جی بالکل درست فرماتے ہیں. دیکھیے جب میں اپنے ابھی یونیورسٹی سے نکلوں گا نا تو ہر ایک اشارے پہ مجھے بچے نظر آئیں گے جو بھیک مانگ رہے ہوں گے, چھوٹے بچے ہوں گے, میرے پوتے نواسیوں کی عمر کے ہوں گے. میرے دل کٹتا ہے, ان کا کیا فیوچر ہے؟ کوئی فیوچر نہیں. اور ہم کچھ کر رہے ہیں؟ کچھ نہیں کر رہے. آپ ٹرانسجینڈرز کی بات کرتے ہیں, اگلے چوراہے پہ ٹرانسجینڈر کھڑا ہوگا, بھیک مانگ رہا ہوگا. تو دیکھیں یہ پرابلم بہت زیادہ ہیں. یہ خالی پائس اسٹیٹمنٹ سے نہیں حل ہو سکتا. اس کے لیے آپ کو بیٹھ کے بات کرنی پڑے گی. بھائی کیسے آپ پیسے کیسے ریڈسٹریبیوٹ کریں گے؟ پھر ایک بہت بڑا ہماری سوسائٹی میں لوگ وائلنٹ ایکسٹریمزم کے شیدائی ہیں, اس پہ یقین رکھتے ہیں. ان کو کیسے آپ دوبارہ اچھے شہری بنائیں گے؟ اچھے شہری تو ہم بناتے ہی نہیں ہیں. ہم تو بات کرتے ہیں, اسلام کو ہم بہت مس یوز کرتے ہیں. سوری ٹو سے, میں پریکٹسنگ مسلم ہوں, نماز روزہ سب کچھ کرتا ہوں, حج بھی کیا ہوا ہے. مگر دیکھیں ہم اپنے مذہب کو مس یوز کرتے ہیں. اور ہمارا مذہب جو ہے نا, ہم یہ پالیسی ڈاکومنٹ مذہب نے دیا ہوا ہے نا, نہیں دیا مذہب نے ہماری. جو رسول کریم کا آخری خطبہ تھا اس میں کیا تھا کہ مرد کو عورت پہ فوقیت نہیں, عورت کو مرد, سب کے برابر. صرف انسانیت کی بات کی گئی ہے, انسانی حقوق کی بات کی گئی ہے. वो डॉक्यूमेंट आपके पास नहीं है। तो बात मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि ये इसको प्रैक्टिकल करना मुश्किल नहीं है, बशर्ते कि हुकूमत चाहे कि इसको हमने करना है। ये जो बच्चे सड़कों पे फिर रहे हैं, जो ये ट्रांसजेंडर सड़कों पे फिर रहे हैं, इनको हम कैसे इनको दोबारा माशरे का एक फाल शहरी बना सकेंगे, कैसे इनको रोटी कपड़ा मकान मुहैया कर सकेंगे। ये खाली पॉलिटिकल स्लोगन नहीं होने चाहिए। ये पहले भी माजी में भी ये बातें हो चुकी है रोटी कपड़ा मकान की, मगर इसको हकीकी माने देने, ये मसला है। अगर इसको हम हल कर सकते हैं, और ये पॉलिटिशियन कर सकता है, पॉलिटिशियन चाहे तो सब कुछ कर सकता है, जो हमारे हुक्मरान है वो सब कुछ कर सकता है। सॉरी, मैं थोड़ा सा जज्बाती हो गया। शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत।
Sir, thank you very much. There's an interesting comment by Imran Sardar in chat window. He says, I have some reservation with the name National Security Policy that gives a flavor of militarization of national problems. In my view, its name should be Pakistan's Vision 2026. Does somebody wants to comment on this?
मेरा ख्याल है कि वो कहते हैं कि अल्फाज के पेचों में उलझते नहीं दाना। तो ये बड़ी माइनर सी चीज़ है। वो प्रॉबेबली चूंकि बच्चों को हम उस तरह पढ़ाते नहीं, अभी तक सिक्योरिटी से हमारे यहाँ वो कन्वेंशनल सिक्योरिटी जहन में आ जाती है। अगर हम सिक्योरिटी की ब्रॉडर डेफिनेशन पढ़ें जो आजकल चल रही है, तो वो उसके अंदर फिर वो आपकी सारी जो आप अपने राइट्स प्रिजर्व करते हैं जिन जिन एरियाज में, वो सारा का सारा सिक्योरिटी का हिस्सा है। तो आई थिंक इट्स परफेक्टली ऑल राइट। बाकी मुल्क भी इस टर्मिनोलॉजी को यूज कर रहे हैं, तो देयर इज नो हार्म इन डूइंग दैट। ये थोड़ा सा स्पेसिफिक हो जाती है। वो जब आप विजन की बात करते हैं, वी ऑलरेडी हैव नेशनल विजन, वो और ज्यादा बहुत ब्रॉड हो जाती है, वो इतनी स्पेसिफिक नहीं रहती। तो आई थिंक वो टाइटल से एज फार एज आई एम कंसर्न मुझे कोई इशू नहीं है।
Ji, Dr. Salma Shaheen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Azhar because the document is and was about security, national security. So that's why the name is there. It's if you see in other countries, there are defense white papers, there are white papers, and there are nuclear posture review, for example, of US that relates to particular. So this document is just related to the national security. So and rest of the things they included in it to just support that national security policy. For example, if they talked about social cohesion, if they talked about dignity of the citizens, so that are used to just to meet the same objective. I guess with regards to vision, we have a vision, we have our constitution, we have other things. So there could be another, if somebody wants to, there could be a larger document of the vision, but I don't think so that, the name has anything, any difficulty in it.
Ji, chale, thank you. Dr. Shaheen, Dr. Shaheen I'll come to you. I'll just read this last question from the chat box, which was raised very early, but I missed it. Meanwhile, you can comment. The others can think about what to say. This was from Arsalan Arain. He said, to effectively implement the new national security policy, Pakistan would require a great pool of economic strategists, as Pakistan has to take out its economy from distress situation. Where do you see Pakistan's preparedness in that area? Because he thinks Pakistan's strategists, they lack this basic knowledge of economy. While the others can think about the response, Dr. Shaheen Akhtar, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Adil. I think the very recognition of the broadening of the, notion of security comes under the larger, this domain of national security. Otherwise, it will be defense policy, you see. It doesn't talk about the defense policy per se, it is national. And under that, in fact, they have tried to really draw a balance, you see. So, which has been going on, I mean, it was since like 70s, 80s, and especially after 90s. In Pakistan, I think officially is being now recognized that there is a broadening of the, this notion of security, which has human security dimension, which has the economic security dimension, and all other aspects which are like now emerging as a challenge to the citizen. When you talk about the citizen-centric, it is the individual security, which is coming in a big way in the domain of security, see? So it is, to me, I don't really find any disconnect. It's not a defense policy, but within the say, larger national security, you try to really say contextualize the military security or your say traditional security per se. So it is not fair to really see it through the prism of the defense policy per se. Thank you.
Very aptly stated. National means nation's security policy. So anything that secures nation. But why this confusion between military or security and the national security policy? Because in the past, it has been misused by both political and the military governments for their own self-interest. And that is how we have conflated these. And there is a confusion that whenever we talk about national, so people start to think about probably it's military dominant, whereas it is not. Dr. Azhar, you have raised your hand. Do you want to say something?
अच्छा एक तो quickly on the lighter side, I don't know Dr. Shaheen उसमें शामिल थी कि नहीं. जब first time हमें ये draft show किया गया था तो it said 2023. तो वो फिर हमने कहा कि यार इससे तो बिल्कुल ऐसे लग रहा है जैसे कि सिर्फ प्राइम मिनिस्टर के लिए बनाई गई है नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी ये ना करे. तो वो उन्होंने उसको चेंज करके वहां कर दी. I think the question was about economic experts, the need of economic experts versus what. I'll get back to that. ये वही है जो हमारा because of mindset. मेरे ख्याल में हमें economic expert की जरूरत नहीं. हमने तो IMF, World Bank, दुनिया का हर economic, हमें political experts की जरूरत है जो हमारा जो हमें ये बताएं कि how to put our own house in order. जिस दिन good governance आ गई, my belief is कि economy as a by-product खुद ब खुद ठीक होगी. इसको आप रोक नहीं सकेंगे, बट आप पहले अपनी गवर्नेंस ठीक करें, अपनी पॉलिटिक्स को सही कीजिए. इकोनॉमी के एक्सपर्ट्स आपके पास बहुत हैं. इकोनॉमी के एक्सपर्ट्स जब गवर्नेंस करने की कोशिश करते हैं वहां पे गड़बड़ होती है. और वही मैं जो बात कर रहा था, चाइना में भी लोग हमें यही सिखाते हैं कि जी इकोनॉमिक टेक ऑफ किया चाइना ने. चाइना ने पहले स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म्स की. आप मुझसे बेहतर जानते हैं चाइना ने अपनी पार्टी के अंदर भी रिफॉर्म्स की. पहले जो रूलिंग कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी थी, चाइना ने गवर्नमेंट के अंदर रिफॉर्म्स की, लीडरशिप लेके आए, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी, नेशनल कोहेजन, सॉवरेनिटी एस्टैब्लिश करने के बाद इकोनॉमिकली दे वर एबल टू टेक ऑफ. वो ऐसे नहीं हुआ कि वो इकोनॉमिक टेक ऑफ कर लिया और बाद में सारी चीजें ठीक हो गई. तो वो आई थिंक सर आयजा ने भी कहा था दैट इज पुटिंग कार्ट बिफोर द हॉर्स. तो वो हमने प्रायोरिटी अपनी ठीक करनी है. इंशाल्लाह चीजें ठीक हो जाएंगी.
So grateful. I think now it's almost time to end, and rightly on the right note, there's no one size fits all model of national security that can be replicated on everywhere. So every country has its own peculiar geostrategic environment, its own internal dynamics, the relations with the foreign actors, international environment, and what are the ambitions of that state. So all those factors, they figure into national priorities, and that is how you develop a national security policy. So the examples like Dr. Azhar said, just saying that we want to import the China model. China has struggled for such a long time. Their demography, their social cohesion, all those aspects are quite different, and it cannot be replicated in Pakistan. And likewise, we cannot replicate anything which happens in Germany, United States, or UK. We have a peculiar security, and that's the major challenge, to understand, analyze your own security dynamics, your own strengths and weaknesses, because whatever weaknesses we have, the other countries may not have those things. So we have to address our own weaknesses, and we have to capitalize on our own strengths, and that is how you will come up with optimum policy that can safeguard your national security interests. But this was a very interesting session, and I think this is an ongoing debate. One positive thing that has come out of this national security policy document is that now people are talking about national security, and lots of misperceptions are also being cleared, because as one gentleman said, national security gives a flavor of something related to military. I think those notions have to be cleared. National security is not only military security. Military is one tool to achieve national security. I think those basics at the grassroots level, at the students, if they start to debate, discuss, and clarify their concepts, they are the future policy makers. So they will have better clarity, better vision to formulate future policies of Pakistan. And with this, I would like to thank everyone, the guest and the panelists who joined us, and the special guest who joined us later, Dr. Azhar and Dr. Shaheen, at a very short notice. Rather, I probably pushed them and plugged them and included them in the panelists. I'm grateful to both of you and to rest of you, the others also.
Thank you.
And I'm also grateful to Ms. Aiza Azam, who actually organized and arranged this webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, and till next webinar from FASS. Thank you very much for the office. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.